My name is Siriporn. I'm 72 years old, and I want to tell you about a woman I used to be. A woman I am not proud of. Not because she was cruel, though sometimes the things she said in anger came close to cruelty. Not because she didn't love the people around her, because she did, with an intensity that still surprises me when I remember it. But because she was ruled, completely and absolutely ruled by something she never understood, something that moved through her like a weather system, arriving without warning, leaving destruction behind it, and departing as if nothing had happened, while the people in the room were still standing in the wreckage. That something was anger, and I didn't know how to manage it. I didn't even know that managing it was possible. I thought anger was just how I was, that my intensity was my character, that the heat that rose so quickly inside me was simply the price of caring deeply. For 40 years I told myself that story, and for 40 years I paid for it. In relationships that couldn't withstand the temperature. In words I spoke that I could never take back. In the slow accumulating cost of being someone people loved but also feared. Someone whose moods set the weather for everyone in the room. Someone who didn't know how to hold the fire. Then something happened that made me stop. Not gradually, suddenly. I said something in anger to someone I loved deeply, something I cannot repeat here, something that cut to a place so tender and so old that I could see it land before the words had even finished. And in the silence that followed, in that particular and devastating silence, I saw myself from outside for the first time. I saw what my anger actually did, not to me, to them. And what I saw broke something open that had been closed a long time. Because up until that moment, I had understood my anger as mine, as something happening inside me that was about me. What I saw in that silence was that my anger had never been only mine. It had always been a force moving through relationships, through rooms, through the people who loved me and stayed anyway, and quietly absorbed what I released without knowing I was releasing it. The Buddhist teachings I found in the years that followed did not tell me my anger was wrong. That surprised me. I expected to be corrected, to be told that anger was a poison, a sin, a failure of spiritual development. Instead, what I found was something far more sophisticated. The Buddha taught that anger is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a messenger to be understood, a signal arising from somewhere deep in our human system, pointing to something that matters, something that has been threatened or violated or misunderstood. The anger itself is not the problem. What we do with it is the question. And answering that question intelligently, with skill and awareness rather than reaction, is one of the most demanding and most transformative practices a human being can undertake. The first thing Buddhism taught me about anger is something that changed how I related to it from the very beginning. Anger always arrives with a delay. Between the event that triggers the anger and the anger itself, there is a moment, almost invisible, almost too small to notice, but real. A fraction of a second where the event lands and the anger has not yet fully formed. The Buddhist practice of awareness is partly about learning to find that moment, to inhabit it, to use it as a space where choice becomes possible. Because before I found that space, I had no choice. The trigger happened, and the anger happened, and the words came, and by the time I was aware of what was occurring, I was already inside it. There was no gap, no breath, no moment of standing outside the process and deciding what to do. Learning to find that gap required nothing dramatic at first, just the willingness to notice, to watch my own internal states the way you might watch weather from a window, with curiosity rather than identification, with some small amount of distance between the observer and the observed. The practice I was given was simple and almost impossibly difficult at the same time. When you feel anger arising, pause before you act. One breath, that was all. One single breath taken consciously before doing anything, saying anything, deciding anything. One breath between the rising and the expression. And in that one breath, just enough space opens for something other than pure reaction to enter. If something in this is reaching you, if you recognize your own anger in what I'm describing, then stay with me. Because what comes next is the part that most people who struggle with anger never discover. Not how to suppress it, how to work with it, how to use it as a doorway rather than a weapon. And if this space has offered you something real tonight, come back when you need it, because learning to manage anger is not a one-time achievement. It is a practice, and practices need places to return to. The second thing Buddhism taught me is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all. You have to feel the anger fully before you can work with it wisely. For years I had tried to manage my anger by suppressing it, by holding it down, by putting my considerable will between the anger and its expression and refusing to let it out. And what I discovered, as anyone who has tried this knows, is that suppressed anger does not disappear. It builds pressure. It finds other exits. It leaks into sarcasm and coldness and the particular cruelty of someone who is pretending to be calm. Suppression is not management. It is delay with interest. The bill comes due eventually, and when it does, it comes with everything that accumulated while you were holding it down. The Buddhist approach is different. It says, feel it completely. Let the anger be there, fully present, fully felt in your body and your chest and your face and your hands. But feel it in awareness rather than in reaction. There is a difference between experiencing anger and acting from anger, between acknowledging the heat and throwing yourself into the flame. When you can sit with the anger, even for a moment, even imperfectly, and simply feel it without immediately needing to do something with it, something remarkable happens. The anger begins to give up its information. The message it was carrying starts to become legible. You begin to sense what is actually underneath, what was actually threatened, what actually matters. Because anger is almost never about what it appears to be about on the surface. Beneath every rage, there is a fear or a hurt or a sense of injustice that the anger is protecting. And that protected thing is the real territory. That is where the actual work happens. The third teaching changed how I understood the relationship between anger and compassion. And it is one I return to constantly even now. The Buddha taught that anger and compassion arise from the same root. They are both responses to suffering. Compassion says, I see your pain. Anger says, this should not be. Both arise from caring. Both involve a response to something that matters. The difference is what happens in the moment between the caring and the action. Compassion pauses, understands, responds from a place of connection. Anger reacts, assumes, responds from a place of threat. And the practice, the daily, difficult, beautiful practice, is learning to move from the first impulse, which is often angry, toward the deeper response, which is almost always something more complex and more useful and more true. I remember the moment I first truly felt this shift. Someone had done something that hurt me. The anger was immediate, hot, certain, and I noticed it arising, and I took my breath, and I sat with the feeling, and I asked, beneath this anger, what is actually here? And what came up was not more anger. It was sadness, a very old sadness that the anger had been protecting for years. A sadness about feeling unseen, about having given something and having it treated as though it didn't matter. And from that place, from that honest and vulnerable place, the conversation I had was completely different. Not because I wasn't upset, but because I was upset about something real, something specific, something that could actually be addressed. Rather than expressing heat that the other person could only defend against. The fourth teaching is one that seems simple and is actually profound. Anger that is expressed immediately is almost always expressed poorly. The heat of the moment compresses everything. Nuance disappears. The real issue gets buried under the urgency of the emotion. What comes out is the loudest and most immediate thing, not the truest thing, not the most useful thing, not the thing that will actually lead somewhere constructive. Buddhism teaches the practice of the considered response, of allowing time to move between the feeling and the expression. Not so that you suppress, not so that you pretend, but so that when you do speak, you speak from the full truth rather than from the fraction of truth that anger makes visible. I began to practice writing before speaking. When something provoked anger in me, I would sit with it and write what I actually felt, not what I wanted to say in the moment, not the cutting thing, the true thing. And almost always what I wrote was different from what I would have said, more honest, more specific, more connected to what actually mattered. And when I brought those truer things into conversation, something different happened. Not always resolution, but always something more real, more human, more able to be worked with. The fifth teaching is the one that holds everything else together, and it is this: your anger is information about your values. Every time you feel anger, something you care about has been threatened or violated. When you feel anger at injustice, it is because fairness matters to you. When you feel anger at betrayal, it is because trust matters to you. When you feel anger at being dismissed, it is because your worth matters to you. These are not small things. These are the things that make you who you are. And your anger, rightly understood, is pointing directly at them, at the places in you that are most alive, most essential, most worth protecting. The skill is learning to let the anger point rather than consume, to use it as a compass rather than a weapon, to ask, this feeling is telling me something matters here. What is it? And then to bring that something, that real thing, that actual value or need or wound into the light where it can be seen and addressed and worked with. Rather than expressing the anger in a way that guarantees the real issue never gets heard. Because when you express anger loudly, people defend against the anger. They don't see what's underneath it. They can't. They're too busy protecting themselves from the heat. But when you speak from underneath the anger, from the tender and real place the anger was protecting, people can actually hear you. And hearing is where things change. My name is Siriporn. I'm 72 years old. I have not stopped feeling anger in all the years since I started practicing with it this way. I still feel it. It still rises. It still has heat and urgency and the impulse to express immediately. But my relationship to it has changed completely. It is no longer a force that moves through me and leaves destruction behind it. It is a signal I have learned to read, a messenger I have learned to listen to before acting, a doorway I have learned to walk through slowly rather than blow apart. And the relationships in my life are different because of it. More honest, more real, more able to hold difficulty without breaking. Before we part tonight, I want to ask you something. When was the last time you sat with your anger long enough to hear what it was actually trying to tell you? Not to suppress it, not to express it, just to listen to it. The answer to that question might be where everything begins. And if you want to share it, tell me in the comments. Where are you in this? What does your anger protect? Because what it protects is almost always something worth knowing.